So I've got this crazy story from when I was a park ranger in Alaska. It's really hard to explain how wild it is there. It's just endless nature, untouched by people. Summer is fantastic, but winters can be pretty tough. It's super cold out there, downright freezing. Back then, I had this job in a place quite far from the city, about 2 days' walk away. Some folks might find it pretty lonely, but I kind of liked being on my own. It was winter, and there was a new layer of snow everywhere you looked. It was pretty tough, you know. Every living thing, me included, was working extra hard to get by. Each day I had to check on the trap lines we set up around. Besides the freezing cold, it was equally brutal to move around with so much snow everywhere. We had these traps set up pretty far from each other, so I had to walk through thick forests full of different types of wild animals. You could see signs of animals everywhere, scratches on trees, crushed bushes, and sometimes even a dead animal. This was real, wild nature. I can still clearly remember that morning. It was super cold and there was frost on my truck windows. I was driving on my standard route when some weird things happened, but I just brushed them off as strange coincidences. You know, when you're really deep into the woods, rational and irrational stuff start to mix a lot more than you'd expect. So it gets really tough when the weather is bad. I just want to finish my job and get back to the cozy station. Halfway through, I find a trap that's not only been sprung, but also completely torn apart. Usually these are bear traps. They're pretty tough devices. I'd never seen anything like it. The metal parts were ripped apart like they were just paper. You could see some scratches on the floor and signs of a fight, but nothing that showed the thing trapped had escaped. I looked around quickly and suddenly smelled something awful. It was the clear smell of rotten meat getting stronger every second. It was definitely spoiled and not something I'd expect to find in a dead body in this cold. Anything dead for a long time should be frozen here. There was also something different in the air. I couldn't exactly tell what it was, but it felt really heavy and somewhat suffocating. I moved away from the awful smell and the weird feeling, trying to gather myself. As the day went on, the sickening smell persisted and even seemed to get stronger. You know how a dead body smells, right? Well, this was way worse, like someone was slow-cooking death. I'm not the type to get scared, but something felt really wrong about the woods that day. The usual sound of the leaves and the birds, everything was oddly quiet. It was as if all the animals were holding their breaths. The big trees were casting creepy shadows that looked like they were hiding something scary. I was walking really hard through the thick snow. All I could hear was the noise my boots made. I had an unsettling feeling. Something just didn't feel right. The wild outdoors that I've gotten used to over the years suddenly felt scary. But I kept going. I wanted to finish this job fast so I could head back to base. As I moved along, I started seeing weird claw marks on some trees and odd footprints. There were weird prints that looked like a mix between animal hooves and human footprints. I've spotted deer and bear tracks before, but these were different, way bigger. Also, the place was full of odd noises that were hard to understand and kind of spooked me. Every time I heard leaves rustling or twigs snapping, I got really scared and started imagining scary things. I thought maybe I'm just freaking out for no reason. But then, I felt like someone was watching me. I kept catching some weird movements in the trees from the corner of my eye. For a second, I was totally stuck, trying hard to just run off. I was facing something I couldn't wrap my head around. It was some scary old thing that I thought only existed in old stories no one really remembers. I felt torn between being scared and wanting to do my job, but in the end I was just too scared. I figured I should report what I found and head back to the station. I didn't need to see whatever made those tracks to know it wasn't a regular animal. I've never seen anything like this in my job before. This was something different. The woods didn't feel right. They just made me feel even more scared. I knew what could leave hoof prints and stink like decay. You can probably guess what it is. The locals believe saying its name out loud will make it appear. I still work out in the wilderness, and I don't want to mess with this. I've never been as scared as I was that day. That incident and the worry that followed has really changed how I see the untouched Alaskan outdoors. I reckon some things are better not messed with. Don't forget, if you're ever by yourself in the wilds of Alaska, stay sharp. If you feel like something's keeping an eye on you, you're likely correct. I've been on a farm all my life. You know how it goes. Animals are born and they die. Mostly we raise them for food, but sometimes they get sick and die. Sometimes they get into trouble, like getting stuck in a fence when no one's around. And then there are times when they just die, and you don't know why. I share this story a lot as a warning because it really happened. I look after sheep in Montana. My partner and I bought a big plot of land to have more space for our family and business. It had a decent house and barn already there, and we built a fence to keep out predators. We kept getting animals from the local farm swaps, starting with pairs of sheep, then different breeds. We just couldn't stop. This meant we had to build even more fences. After that, we needed to get some chickens. We made a little chicken house that joined up with the barn. The chickens were free to walk around the yard all day, but they'd always return to the coop when it was bedtime. All we had to do was close their small door once it got dark. We often hang out at farm swaps over the weekend, so we've gotten to know our neighbors pretty well. Most raise animals and would share stories about them, make jokes, and give each other heads-ups about predators in the area. We decided to improve our security by getting a puppy. Our hope is that it'll help guard our livestock as it grows. We got a Great Pyrenees, and if you know a thing or two about them, you know they grow super big. We called him Tuck. My partner and I pampered Tuck like crazy. We took him with us wherever we went. He was crazy about car rides. Once he got big enough, he'd hop into the pickup bed, hoping we'd take him along for a ride. I began leaving the back of the truck open because it's a raised truck and really tall. Once, during one unusually hot summer, our chickens began to faint from the heat. One even died from lack of water. We got them a fan and some spray tools, but they usually wander around most of the time. We lost the first one on Monday. By Thursday, only 10 out of the initial 15 were left. Some didn't return at night, and we worried they might have died in the heat. On Friday, we realized we forgot to shut the chicken coop's door. A couple were already wandering in the yard. We let Tuck out while we started our daily tasks. He bolted towards the coop and started barking like crazy. We decided to check it out and noticed feathers and some other stuff scattered near the small structure. Tuck became uneasy and took off. There was a chicken that was really torn up right next to the chicken coop. It was a nasty sight. My partner had never seen anything like it before. I'm afraid so. I thought maybe a coyote or a wolf had managed to get its head in the door. She probably just happened to be too close to the entrance and got caught. But then, we found something else out the next night. Around 10:30, Tuck started getting restless and began to whine near the sliding glass door. That escalated into howling, so I got the shotgun and we headed outside together. My spouse came along too, carrying a flashlight. The chicken coop is quite a distance from the house, about 100 yards away. Tuck ran towards it so fast, and he just wouldn't come back even when I called. We could hear him growling like he was getting into a fight. When we got to the coop, Tuck had scared away whatever was causing trouble. He sniffed around for a bit before heading to the barn. One of our sheep started making a ton of noise. We tracked Tuck because he probably switched on the sensor lights. That's when we saw this thing. It was gray, standing almost 7 feet tall on 2 legs. Kinda looked like a wolf with a super long snout. Its chest was really big and muscular, and it was standing on 2 legs. Its hair was long, kind of like a mane, and it stood up when it growled at us. The barn stunk like a wet dog, way worse than the smell of the farm animals. I pointed my shotgun at it. Right then, Tuck jumped at it. I couldn't hold him back. It threw the 146 LB dog around like he was weightless and let out a deep growl. I tried to shoot, but my hands were too shaky and I missed. The creature jumped into the animal pens and broke through the barn door. Tuck ran out trying to stop it. Honestly, we were too scared to follow. I got out just in time to see Tuck jumping into the truck. The thing that looked like a wolf had vanished. I decided to check on Tuck, hearing him whine. When I tried to peek over the back of the truck, Tuck caught my pant leg in his mouth. He was hiding under the truck. Suddenly, an animal jumped out from the truck and landed around 10 feet away, already running. I attempted to shoot at it again as it ran incredibly fast, sometimes on all fours and sometimes on two legs. I believe I might have struck it this time, but that thing was huge. Even if I did, it didn't seem to slow it down. Luckily, that was the last time we came across that thing. We warned the neighbors, and now we're all on the lookout for it. I visited Northern California 3 years ago and would go for a walk in the redwoods every morning. It's really amazing there. The trees are super tall and big, like you're walking among giants. It's totally like unspoiled nature. Being in the woods is really calming. You can hear birds chirping, leaves moving, and see some sun shining through. Walking around those huge trees made me see how I'm just a small part of everything, and I kind of liked that. As they say, nature has a way of comforting you that some folks just don't get. I woke up super early that day, had my breakfast, and then prepared my camera, planning to capture some animals in their morning activities or, if lucky, some rare birds. I didn't expect, though, that my morning walk would end up being a bit scary. The redwoods were massive and they were really spaced out, sort of like those ancient forests you'd usually only hear about. I was just out walking and watching the animals, things like chipmunks in the trees and blue jays goofing off. I'd already been on this walk for about 2 hours, really liking the beauty and calmness. Usually you'd see deer or even raccoons if you're up this early, but today was different. When I was deep in the woods, I saw a strange footprint. They were big, but what was weird is that they looked like human footprints, but missing a shoe. But really, they were just way too huge. It didn't add up. I thought maybe someone was messing around, like using some fake footprint gadget or something. So I just kept on going, feeling a bit creeped out as I got deeper into the dense forest. Then, when I was getting pretty freaked out, something else went down. I was just chilling, hoping to see a kingfisher going for its midday snack when I heard something weird. It wasn't like the usual forest noises. It was deep and grumbly, super loud. It felt like it was echoing off the nearby redwoods. I suddenly couldn't move. Everything else became silent, and all I could hear was my own heart beating very loudly. Even though I was still trying to process things, I was caught by surprise by what happened next. Then it was like I felt it rather than hearing it. I heard loud footsteps, leaves crunching, and branches snapping, the loudest I'd ever heard while out in the woods. I turned around and got goosebumps. There it was, seeming to know I was there just like I knew it was there. It was so tall that its head even touched a low branch. Its shoulders were almost as wide as the path we were walking on. I was struck by how it stood up straight like a person, but it definitely wasn't human. It gave off this bold vibe. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur. With some lighter red spots, it really popped out next to the bright green plants. Its face was super wrinkly, with dark eyes under a prominent forehead and a thick jaw. This jaw was sharp and wrapped in hairy texture, a pretty strange sight. When it sniffed around, the smell was so bad it left an awful taste in my mouth. It had a strong smell of damp fur, really intense. Its eyes were super weird, almost human-like. They were deep and dark, like they got things, My heart was pounding like crazy. We hung out there for a bit, just looking at each other. It's like this animal was really interested in me. We only stopped looking when we heard a big growl. The creature showed off its muscles through its heavy coat. Then it spun around and headed back into the forest. Its steps made echoes that slowly faded away until it was completely silent. I was so shocked, I couldn't do anything but stand there. I was just trying to figure out what went down. I've heard all these tales before. I never really bought into them, though. Everyone's heard about this sort of creature. Yeah, honestly, I never thought I would actually see it. I must have stood still for hours before I finally could move. Each shadow or sound made my heart race as I retraced my steps. Even when I was out of the woods and back on the road, I was still scared. Honestly, I'm still freaked out. How could I not be? That encounter really scared me. Now every time I go into the forest, I can't help but remember those intense eyes, that distinctive smell, and that huge figure disappearing amongst the trees. I keep thinking about it, and it's got me hooked on nature. I was really scared and couldn't believe that animal was real, but I know I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. This was back in July 2018, a hot and humid day. I was walking around in these thick swamps around Louisiana, not far from where I live. I just moved to Baton Rouge because of work and just felt like I needed to get to know the place better. I'd been walking for hours, so I'd kind of tuned out the noise of the buzzing insects and all the different bird sounds. But then, when it started to get dark, something got my attention. The loud noises that I had heard all day suddenly stopped. It got so quiet in the swamp it made me feel weird. Even with only a bit of light coming through those old mossy trees, I saw something move. There was this crazy, tall, about 8 feet figure moving strangely in the swamp. It seemed human but moved weird. I quickly hid behind a tree, heart pounding. I tried looking at it again, squinting to make out more details as the light was getting dim. It walked weirdly, as if it was just learning how to use its legs. Every step looked tough and uncomfortable. The water around it kind of made waves that made me feel uneasy. When the sun started going down, a beam of light shot through the trees and lit up the creature for a second. It took my breath away. The thing looked like an alligator or a crocodile. Its skin shone a bit under the sunlight. What really scared me, though, were the eyes. Super bright yellow like glowing coals. They looked like a hunter's eyes. I kept quiet, watching it move through the dark swamp water, its eyes locked onto where I was hiding. I saw it moving about, really heavy but sure of itself, not once breaking its stare, looking really scary in the half-light. Its skin was all weird, dark, muddy scales that helped it blend in with the swamp. At that point, I wasn't thinking straight, just focusing on staying safe. My hands were sweaty and I was breathing hard. I wanted to run away, but I was too scared and couldn't take my eyes off the creature. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Finally, it looked away and went further into the swamp until I couldn't see it anymore. I felt so relieved when I couldn't see it anymore. My lungs were hurting from holding my breath and my heart was still racing from the scare. I was sweaty and felt like my knees would give out any moment. I stayed behind the tree for a bit, just listening to the swamp sounds. The silence started to break as the noise of nighttime creatures, frogs, bugs, and birds that love the night, started to build up again. It felt like the swamp had been holding its breath when that thing was around, and now it was letting out all its stress, producing all these sounds. Little by little, I could feel myself getting over my fear and starting to feel a mix of confusion and excitement. I worked up the courage to look out from where I was hiding, half expecting to see those creepy yellow eyes shining in the dark. There wasn't anything. I walked forward nervously, my shoes making squishy noises in the wet mud. The ground under me was wet and chilly. I knew I had to get out of these bushes, which seemed to be the home of that creature. I got lost in the swamp, but finally found the narrow path that brought me there. I was stepping on leaves and twigs, and my mind was full of confusion. What the heck was that creature? Where'd that thing pop out from? And why didn't it try to get us? More importantly, are there any more out there? After getting out of the swamp, seeing regular buildings and people was a massive relief. I managed to get away and, more importantly, stay alive. But ever since that incident, I couldn't see the swamp as just a natural place anymore. It now felt like some scary, almost supernatural place to me. In the days after, I had to spend hours explaining what happened, first to the police, then to people who know about wildlife. Some of them believed my story, but most didn't. They said I must have seen things because I was too tired or just mistook some animal due to the bad light. But honestly, I'm sure what I saw wasn't normal. I traveled alone to Alaska and started my trip in Juneau. The first place I wanted to visit was the Mendenhall Glacier Caves. It's really one of the pristine sights of Alaska. If you're into exciting stuff like me, you've got to see it. It's like a maze made out of ice. It's a tiny place, all caught up in this wild blue ice. It feels really strange, as if you've walked into a different world. It was super quiet inside except for the occasional drip of water from melting ice or the distant sound of moving glaciers. You could even hear your own heartbeat if you paid attention. So there I was, fully packed for a day's trip to Mendenhall. I enjoyed exploring unusual places like this. I checked out spots that were a bit off the grid. Gotta say, it was way more than I expected. The trip into the caves was totally mind-blowing. The creepy blue light from the ice and the huge ice spikes hanging down. It really made me feel small compared to the awesomeness of nature. I kept going further into the cave, wanting to check out every corner. My flashlight made weird shadows on the ice, making different shapes. I remember it was cold, but not too bad. The further I got into the cave, the more I felt the air changing. The first thing I noticed was this weird smell. It was kind of like metal, so much that I felt like I could taste it. Very strange for a place like this. Anyway, I just kept going. I'd never been in an ice cave before, so for all I knew, that smell was totally normal. It was already really quiet, but it somehow got even quieter, if you can imagine that. There wasn't just silence, but like the quiet moment before a storm. I felt like something was about to happen, but I didn't know what. Suddenly my flashlight began to blink and then it just went out. Even though I'd charged it the night before, it was like something had drained the battery. So I was in the middle of a glacier, could hardly see anything. I felt like someone was watching me, and then I heard this weird humming sound. It was like a bunch of people were whispering, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I tried to find where it was coming from in the dark, but no luck. Suddenly, a super bright light filled the whole place. It basically wiped out everything in its way. I didn't know what was happening, and to be honest, I still don't fully understand what went down. I had to squint because the light was so intense. After a while, I could start to see through the bright fog. There was something like a vehicle floating right above me, smoothly sliding over the icy ground. It was as big as a dinner plate, but a lot bigger. I guess you could say it looked like a UFO. I was so focused on the object that I didn't see the people on the ice. They must have shown up when that flash of light happened. These folks looking at me were real weird and short. They had huge heads and black oval eyes, but no irises or pupils. It looked like they were talking without even saying anything. The terrible metal-like smell got stronger, and I had to cover my mouth to keep myself from throwing up. Soon after, I found myself lifted off the ground like I was pulled by some giant magnet. I saw the cave ground moving away, and I was freaking out because I was getting closer to the ship. The last image I got was of this weird creature's face staring at me, its eyes illuminated by the intense light from the floating ship. Somehow, I ended up back at the opening of Mendenhall. Whatever I missed during that lost time, I guess I'll never know. Well, they were nice enough to leave me outside the cave. I looked over myself when I reached my hotel, and it didn't seem like they'd done anything to me. I couldn't really tell, though. When I told other adventurers about it, most of them just laughed like they didn't believe me. Maybe I just imagined the whole thing. Actually, I wish I had. Perhaps the thin air in the cave made me hallucinate. That'd be a more comforting thought than what really happened. I don't have any solid proof or anything. I only have a scary memory that I can't forget. Whether you trust me or not is your call. But I think there are more people like me out there. People with their own stories who are just too scared to share for fear of being laughed at. Some of this might sound nuts, but we need to start discussing it rather than ignoring it. I hope some of you feel encouraged to share your stories too. They surely can't be weirder than mine, and I'm certain about what I saw. I'm a fisherman from Maine, been doing it my whole life, just like my dad and granddad. One average day, I took my boat out to this secluded island I know, a secret spot where haddock fish are always ready for a bite. This time, the sea that's usually deep blue was full of dead fish. Weird, right? Didn't look like any red tide I've seen. I'm not one for superstitions, but it really made me wonder. I figured there would be a clear reason, but honestly, it really freaked me out. We're talking top-quality haddock here, all young and strong, but dead way too early. No seagulls around either, which just made the whole thing even weirder. Why aren't the birds eating the fish? That's not normal. I won't just bring these dead fish to shore without figuring out what's going on. So, I had this weird feeling in my stomach when I began looking into this. Dude, what I found next was so crazy it's like something ripped out of a horror story. I cast a net overboard and pulled in all these dead fish. All of them had this strange look on their faces. Think about how someone would look if they saw something really scary, like the devil. Now think about a fish looking like that, eyes bulging, gills flared, mouth wide open like it was shocked. The water around the island looks muddier than the rest of the ocean. Maybe there's something bad in it. I parked a bit away and then rowed over to not stir up the water. It smelled strongly of sulfur there, although it was somewhat covered by the usual smell of the sea. I stumbled upon this really dark underwater cave. I thought that must be where the problem started. I felt creepy, not because of the cold wind in Maine, but more like I had a strange feeling someone or something was watching me. It was as if the whole ocean was staring at me. Everything around the cave by the sea was quiet, like even the waves had gone silent as I got closer to it. I'm not sure what was going through my head when I chose to check out that dark cave. It was right below the waterline. I saw it from the boat. When I took off my stuff and dived in, the water was freezing cold. I've never been in water so cold. It felt like a dark hole that sucked in all the heat and light. I went down, driven by fear, curiosity, and some silly adventurous feeling. I felt a weird flow that didn't match the sea's calmness. I tried hard to fight against it, but I needed air so badly. Still, I felt something drawing me further into the deep, dark water, like it wanted me there. Suddenly, I came across something, sort of floating just off the cave bottom. Its size kept changing, like it was shifting its shape on purpose. One moment it was just about the size of a small dog, and then suddenly it was huge and towering over me. It looked scary, unlike any animal I've ever seen. It seemed to have horns sticking out from what I guess was its head. It also had these big wings that looked like leather and were folded behind it. Its scales had this weird dark shimmer, and it smelled kind of like sulfur. Its eyes, though I'm not even sure they were actually eyes, were glowing red and gave off this scary sense of hunger, made my heart beat like mad. Out of nowhere, I felt stuck in its look, completely terrified. Whatever this thing was, it was really strong. Honestly, the worst sound I've ever heard? This thing's laughter. It sounded like a ton of voices all mixed up, kind of like a crowd of people jeering or taunting you. It was so loud that it echoed all around the cave and gave me goosebumps. Then something snapped me out of it. My dad's old dagger. He said it was just a small thing with a carved cross on the handle. It was the only thing that kept me sane. I took it out from my belt where it barely shone in the half-light under the water. Seeing this, the creature looked really surprised. With no second thought, I swiftly swam up to the surface. When I came up for air, I could hardly breathe, feeling like a fish out of water. I couldn't shake off this feeling that I was still being watched. I hightailed it back to my boat and took off as fast as I could. Soon I left the island, the creepy cave and the sinister vibe, all behind me. The day after that I was thinking, did that really happen? It's unreal. I actually went into the water. It felt like something was pulling me, like I wasn't even controlling myself. I haven't gone back to that island ever since, and I've never told anyone else this story till now. Who'd really buy my story, right? Just an average fisherman telling stories about sea creatures and demons. Looking back, I was definitely lucky to have made it out. Definitely there's more than just us out here.